Growth Pod is brought to you by Genero, a leading growth agency in the Nordics. We interview marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories and strategies behind profitable growth.
Today's guest is Anssi Mäkelä, the Chief Marketing Officer at Polar. Polar is a Finnish brand known around the world for its cutting-edge heart rate tracking capabilities that include watches, sensors, and services. Welcome to the show, Anssi.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So,
exciting.
Yes, indeed.
Actually, this is my first podcast that I ever done. So,
all right, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's going to be a great one.
I'm pretty sure.
So, Polar is a very exciting brand. So, we definitely want to talk about that. But first, to kind of go into something that we've been talking about a little bit off air, which is this, shall we call it, traditional agency model and how agencies work with clients. You've had a lot of experience in your previous jobs and about seeing how big brands are using these kind of agencies, and you've seen some limitations with that. So I'd be curious to kind of hear about your thoughts on the limitations of, well, first of all, if you could describe the model, the limitations with it, and then talk about what you've done at Polar, which is kind of implementing a new kind of hybrid model.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, over the years, working with many big and small agencies, the challenge always comes from I'm not saying it's necessarily a challenge, but you have to always brief the agency, right? So you brief the agency, and then they are going to go into their room and discuss, and you have the strategies, the creative director, and who else is basically sitting in the room and thinking about how to respond to that brief, right? And the client is not involved at all. And usually it tends come back to the point that they're going to come with their presentation or pitch or whatnot to show, like, this is our big idea. This is the concept that we've been thinking to solve your business challenges or problems. But the client is not in the room, right? So it's not a collaborative model at all. And also it comes down to also the fact that after everything is signed off, great, this is the concept that we want to move forward with, and hoping that it actually answers the problem that you're trying to solve. It comes down to the scope of work. And when it comes down to the scope of work, it's always like, okay, you're going to get this, and this and that, right? And then the project starts moving forward, and you start actually creating all the content and assets and strategies and so on. Then something comes up, right? Another idea and another direction. Then the agency is not willing to make those changes or adapt the concept, because of that would mean extra work. And then that basically means that they're going to come back to you and say, okay, yeah, great, we can do that, but it's going to cost you this much. So in terms of this sort of, what I keep on saying is these traditional agency models are dead, is that they need to evolve to something else. And I think that trend is just going to be increasing over the years and moving forward. I don't believe that this is really sustainable in the long run. But also, I think it also requires a lot from the client side. It doesn't always mean that there's a lot of companies that are able to do what we're doing at the moment. It requires also that you have the right kind of people and talent in-house to some extent in order to actually execute on what I think is sort of this hybrid model that I'm talking about.
And you mentioned you have to kind of build that in-house team, and you started doing that when you kind of started at Polar. But I'd be curious to know, because I feel like one thing that is keeping companies back is this lack of confidence, right? The agencies are the big creative geniuses. They work with so many brands. They have the big ideas. And we, like the client side, the people working at the client side, are just lowly workers who we don't really know how the big world works and so on. So how did you have that confidence to say that, no, actually, we know we can do this, maybe not completely ourselves, but a large part of it we can do ourselves?
Yeah. It also relates back to understanding the business, understanding the company, what it actually does. And yeah, obviously you need some creative people that has some ideas and can execute, right? So a lot of the times, like you said, it's on the agency side. But having those talent in-house is is sort of important. And you never get a client director or strategist or the creative director on the agency side to fully understand the business landscape and where the company is heading and the sort of future vision. They never, like when you create the brief and you try to give as much as insights and stats and whatnot so they can build their concepts, they will never ever understand the company inside out. They don't understand the products. Like you have so limited time of explaining the products, the campaigns, the strategies, and so on. So never will have that sort of in-house information. So absolutely, you need in-house, you need people that are creative. I consider myself, I get excited about new ideas and concepts and obviously trying to build the team around that sort of same mentality that everybody who has an idea can bring it up and it basically start building from there. But then of course you need sort of also on the agency side, you need people to support that then. So that's where it comes really handy. Some would maybe argue that, once you're in-house, you keep on doing the same thing over and over again. That's always the challenge. So you have to be aware of that. But also at the same time, you need sort of somebody coming outside a little bit, poke you to be that, having that sort of creativity flowing in. So I think, you're right. It's not as easy as it's said, but I think we've done significant improvements into that, and it's a constant sort of improvement of the process.
Yeah, I think I respect that, because I think it takes a lot more guts to bring it all in house, because then you are accountable. I think there's, for a brand manager, CMO, there's always a temptation to just be like, I'm just going to hire this award-winning agency, and I'll just kind of like wash my hands. Awards,
my favorite topic. That's actually nice you brought it up. I was actually thinking about it yesterday, and why are sorry, this is so funny, right? So the awards. Why does it matter? So I always categorize agencies into two different categories. One being the ones that actually wants to do a good job for the client. The other ones are the ones who want to make money. Why these great awards and, Cannes Lions or Webby Awards or whatever, right? Like, why does it matter to the client? Why does it matter? Isn't that just like boosting the ego for the agency so they can sell their services to the other? Look at these awards that we won. I mean, it's sort of a kind of a funny topic that I always wonder is like, why these matter? Yeah, it doesn't matter to the client. It's like, end of the day, we look at how well we're selling the products or how well the campaigns are successful and so forth. That's what matters, end of the day.
Yeah. But do you find that that's actually kind of the minority, CMOs or brand managers who actually are mostly focused on the business and the sales of the product, as opposed to the creativity of the campaigns, all the kind of brand metrics? Do you find that's actually a rarity, like you are in the minority?
Yeah, good question. I don't know about what others, but obviously, from our point of view, we look at a lot of different metrics. Maybe too much. Some of them are for sure like vanity metrics and so on, but they're good indications to some extent. But yeah, I mean, I might be in a minority. Maybe you're right.
Yeah, it's that's tough. You mentioned that at Polar you built this kind of the hybrid model, and a part of that is having freelancers or network of freelancers who are specialized in specific, whether it's 3D modeling or like something else. So, and that allows you to very agility and cost effectiveness when it comes to producing assets. Can you talk about the role of having that ability to create a lot of assets quickly in your success when it comes to marketing?
Again,
just to preface, because I feel like there's still a lot. Well, not still, but there are people who feel that what you need is the big idea, the big campaign. And would you agree with that, or do you think that what's the role of volume?
Yeah, I mean, volume is important. I'm not saying that you need to like quantity over quality, but I mean, they go hand in hand. I mean, of course, the volume, and in order to do that, and again, going back a bit to the problem with working with the agencies where you're limited to the X amount of assets, and then you're basically married to that, right? So the way that we do things is we obviously look at, we're not limited by the number of assets. We're not limited by the type of talent that we're tied into some production company or some sort of CGI or 3D guy or whatever. What we do is once we create the concept, right, we know you still need some sort of concept or idea, right? And that's always tailored towards the product and the segment and the target audience and so on. And then you start to sort of formalize in terms of, what is the narrative, how you break it down, what is the messaging. You create a clear sort of framework for that. And once you have that framework in place, then you understand, okay, I need to produce this and this and that, right? So what we're trying to do is that we frame the narrative, the story, the storyline, the messaging and everything. And I don't believe it's like one message that is like you have that big, one tagline, so to say, right? So it's like one size doesn't fit all. So one message might resonate with you, but it doesn't resonate with me. So you have to be able to sort of tailor the messaging to different types of audiences. So that also means that once you sort of tailor your messaging to the different audiences, that also means that you need more assets. So you can't just go with one single tagline approach and hope that everybody will love it, right? So you have to find these ways of talking about the campaigns or the products and so on, or even the brand, right? So you have to find the audience, the messages, the creatives, the formats that will actually work for that audience. And with this model that we have now, is that every time we get into a new project, we create that framework. We know exactly what we want to say. And then we start looking at, okay, who do we need? Okay, do we need a photographer? Do we need a filmmaker? Do we need a CGI guy? And we might go to, through our partner or ourselves, we might do research ourselves. We look at Behance. It's a great pool of talented people. So we're not tied into agencies. Let's say if you look at this from a traditional agency, they have their network of production companies and they do these massive productions, right? And you basically pay a premium for them in order to facilitate that production. So we cut that out and we go straight to the source. So we find the talent ourselves and then we just contact them and say, hey, you know what? It would be cool to do this thing with you. And that's why this is exactly the way that we, for example, found a brilliant CGI or 3D guy that is basically working through the agency, but working for us. Again, migrated or integrated into our processes and you get the fraction of the price. You don't pay the Finnish premium, I'm sorry to say, but the price matters. So you find talented people that are super talented. They might be all over the place, so to say. It doesn't matter where you live. If you're talented and you know what you're doing, you might be working with us.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting because it's not like you've cut out the agencies or whatever freelancer and brought everything in-house, but you've made sure that you're not reliant on a single source to give you you actually have direct contact with everyone that you need to work with.
Yeah, no, not directly. It depends on the case by case, really. Yeah. Like sometimes we work directly with some photographers, for example. It really is a case by case, but most of the time we go through the agency because it's just much easier that way. And they are obviously well connected and they know they do the same research, look at Behance or whatnot, or know somebody else that is specialized on some certain area. So yeah, we don't mind where you're from as long as you're a superstar.
Yeah, that's a good approach to have, especially considering that you are a global brand, and so it's not you have to look everywhere for the best talent. You mentioned messaging. Polar was historically a very engineering-driven company in terms of both product development, but also brand and messaging. And in the last couple of years, you made this pivot in your messaging to be much more consumer-oriented. And could you talk about that? Like, what was the insight, and what's been the process of changing?
So obviously, working in different companies and sort of looking at the way that you present and tell the story about a product. when I joined around 3 years ago, I started looking at, I looked after the website from a design and UI and UX point of view. And I look at the messaging sort of frameworks that we have. And I sort of quickly noticed then that the way that the products are presented, I mean, factually, yes, they're correct. But it's very sort of, might be a bit of this sort of Finnish culture thing as well, but very sort of hard to understand. So one of the things that I really wanted to quickly move into fixing is looking at the way that we talk about the products and talking about the products in a way that I always say like a child can understand. So that was a sort of a massive leap in forward, trying to, first of all, having that talent in-house was fundamental, right? So making sure that we have a person who gets the products, can translate that, let's say, engineer text into something that everybody can understand. So we have invested a lot into the sort of storytelling and narration, so that these when we talk about very technical things, it's super easy to understand. So that was kind of a massive leap forward. And I'm not saying that we're perfect by no means, but I think we have made a massive steps forward in terms of creating that content, especially for the website, even for the ads and everything, so that they are easy to approach and easy to understand. Because at the end of the day, that's ammunition for us in terms of generating word of mouth and get people talking about it. If you know and can explain the product to your friend, isn't that easier than you're like, I'm not sure, how do I explain what the benefits are?
Yeah.
So super important.
Yeah. So what would you say is the big picture kind of narrative about Polar and what you're trying to do, and how does that differ from a Whoop or an Aura or someone else?
Oh, wow. Really don't. I mean, we benchmark everyone in terms of what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, we try to focus on our thing and the way that we want to do things instead of just looking at what everybody else is doing. I think that's also important. I don't want to waste too much time on sort of looking at what the competitors and their messaging and trying to sort of learn something from there. But I mean, in generally speaking, I think it's fundamental that, again, the way that you talk about the product is very clear. It needs to be approachable. It needs to be emotional. It needs to be also rational, right? So you have to create things that has sort of those both aspects. So I think that's sort of where the focus has been. Not directly answering sort of, what you're asking here, but I think, that's the way that we approach it.
Got it. And did you go into, because you mentioned you have to have different messages to different segments or audiences, did you go into that, did you kind of do that exercise of being like, no, these are types of users that we're going to go after, or is that more so, are you more so taking a broad approach? How do you think?
It's sort of a case by case, product by product. I mean, depends on the product and the segment. And I think you sort of said, we're walking in here, you're like, what is your sort of, some competitors are doing this and that. But I said, we're coming from a very sort of sports oriented world, and that's been our sort of the main priority. And I think that's something that we're going to keep on doing. But of course, you have a variety of different types of people in different segments. You have the super athletes to going into, let's say, these sort of techie sports fanatics, so to say, and then you start going lower and lower in terms of the different segments, in terms of just like somebody who wants to be active. Well, of course, you have to sort of tailor your message towards those audiences. But again, it's tied into the product, where the product is sort of segmented or where it stands in terms of the segmentation. And then you start to tailor the message so it resonates. But then when you look at that from a broader point of view, from the site point of view, then that needs to be much broader, right? So you have to be able to educate people in terms of what the right products are for them. So you have to sort of look at, but especially from a product campaign point of view, that's very much tailored to that specific audience, and the messaging needs to resonate to that audience. But then again, on the site, it's more broader as such. So we look at the messaging there as much wider.
Yeah. Question about branding and how you think about the brand. I'm guessing selling all over the world. And in Finland, it's a bit easier. Finns know Polar, we trust them. But when you think about, how do you think about establishing the credibility? Because ultimately, people have to trust that they're spending money on this device, that it will give them superior performance, however you want to define that, whether it's accuracy or some kind of data. So how do you think about establishing that credibility so that customers will pay for a Polar device over some competitor?
Somebody else. I always love quoting Simon Sinek on this one. You start with the why, right? So over the couple of last year, we have also been defining a bit of sort of crystallizing the sort of brand vision, mission, and also the why we do what we do. I think that sort of is fundamental to have very precise, then that should resonate to the audience. Obviously, it's not necessarily something like a campaign that you talk about, but it's all about how that then resonates throughout the different campaigns and activations you do. So that's sort of the heart that is always there. So we have invested a lot of our time to sort of crystallizing that. So I think that's sort of one of the main things that we've been gradually now rolling out, so that we have that reason to believe into that brand. And that's something that we've been sort of doing over the couple of, let's say, last year or so.
Yeah.
So I mean, that fundamentally for me is the one that builds the brand love and sort of the reason to believe, and why would you choose Polar or somebody else if you have a clear sort of idea of that. So
got it. And what do you what role, given the sports background of the brand, what role do you think, whether it's partnerships with athletes or influencers or sponsorships of whatever it's competitions or leagues, like what role do you think those kind of tactics, as opposed to like just like building that connection with established authority in your kind of realm? How do you think about that versus just like communicating about the product and your mission?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I mean, totally makes sense. We work with athletes and ambassadors and influencers and creators. I think those are, I mean, if you look at the media landscape right now, how do you get in front of the people? It's quite fascinating in terms of like, you have 3 seconds, right? You have 3 seconds to capture the audience. So how do you do that? Can you do that as a brand, or you need somebody else to talk about you? I'm not a big believer of just like logo placements and so on, but going from a sort of a value creation and added value point of view, how do you get somebody on board, regardless of the athlete or influencer, that we can actually bring something to that? How can we help that person? How we can improve that person's, well-being or life or performance? I mean, I think that's where it gets interesting, and we have sort of the science to prove that. I think that sort of value creation is fundamental there. But yeah, I mean, we work with different athletes and influencers and so on. I think that's, like I said, I think it's so hard for the brand to tell the story than getting somebody else to tell your story. And that's why I think that sort of is an interesting venue that we are sort of looking into more and more, and how we can do that and build sort of the engine behind that. I think that's kind of an interesting area. Like I said, we do our social communication, we do our stuff, right? But then how that gets captured, it's so much harder than getting somebody else to talk about you. So, but again, it needs to sort of add value.
Got it. But you're always, exactly, so you're always, it's not just about logo placement, getting someone to show up with a Polar. It's always focused on what the product does for them to help them achieve whatever.
Absolutely. I think those type of partnerships are important, that it's not like just the logo placement, or it needs to somehow, we need to be aligned with our sort of ambitions, both ends, right? So that it actually brings something else than just the logo and that's it, right? So
when we're on the topic of brand, how do you incorporate and think about your Finnish heritage? Because obviously Finland has some reputation around the world, and beautiful nature, very honest people, hardworking. I'm speculating. I think this is how
Definitely
the world thinks about us. So how do you think about that? Because I mean, this is a kind of a question that all Finnish brands and Swedish brands too, we have a lot of Swedish listeners, think about. How should they, I hope they're thinking about it, how should they use that heritage when they're trying to think internationally? How do you think about that?
Sort of been thinking about that a bit of the last days, because I knew you were going to be asking this. If we look at, let's pretend for a second, if we would be all about the Finland and the Finnish nature and all that, it wouldn't necessarily resonate in Brazil or some other countries. They're like, I don't get that at all. But that being said, it doesn't mean that we don't do that. We do we want to build on that sort of. I think you brought a few nice keywords, trust. Trust is important. I think in generally speaking, the Finnish brands are very trusted. And also, very practically speaking, how we're bringing that to life is also from a visual point of view. But we don't necessarily look at that from only from a Finland point of view, but more from the Nordics point of view, and trying to bring that sort of aspiration and inspiration of our environment and our playgrounds here. And I think you will start to see more and more of that from us from a visual standpoint. But absolutely, the heritage, where we're coming from as a brand, it's a big story. It's a fascinating story all by itself. And I think we want to build on that trust, build on that accuracy, build on that. It's all part of our communication. But I don't think necessarily that if we would be just entirely focusing that, it would resonate sort of around the world. But it needs to be aspirational and inspirational.
That's interesting. You mentioned story, and previously you talked about narrative, and so I want to go back to that, because I personally find that really interesting, and I'm a big believer in the power of narrative. Like, if you can craft a really good narrative, then it helps kind of put everything into perspective. And so, did I understand correctly that when you're kind of thinking about let's say you're launching a new product, the first thing you will do is kind of create a narrative about, okay, what is this product? Who is it for? What does it do? And then from that, you can draw, you'll figure out, okay, we need these assets, or we need to work with this person. Is that kind of describe your process, or what role does narrative play?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can think of this as, the Amazon sort of backwards thinking of creating the press release and the FAQs and so on, right?
Sorry, can you explain that? Because I don't think people are familiar with the Amazon PR.
Backwards.
The process.
So basically, Amazon has been working on sort of this, it's called backwards thinking, and there's a full book about that. So please feel free to find that from Google or Amazon. Basically, let's put it into very plain English. It's basically you start the project on writing a press release. That's the simplest way of doing it. So how you imagine sort of bringing this product to life and how you would launch it, and you basically start from that. But we don't just do that. That's one great aspect to kick it off, but it's not just that. I think what you need to do, and what we're doing sort of, is building that framework. So we have like this massive workshop where we invite everybody to join, and then we start looking at, the insights, the data, the audience, the goals and everything, and it's in one big canvas. And when we start to sort of narrow it down through conversation, what is important for this product, asking really hard questions, and then basically that translates into a wireframe or a structure of information, how you want to talk about this product. And throughout that sort of wireframe, then that becomes more visual and more visual and more visual. And then you start to have some sort of sketches in terms of how that should be looking like from a visual standpoint, the key messages, the punchlines, the segments, the sort of everything is in that framework. And then it's much easier to take that sort of press release, FAQs, the framework, and then you start looking at, okay, what do we need to? Do we need a film? Do we need an animation? Do we need pictures? What kind of pictures we need? What kind of color world it is? What's the color palette? And everything is being defined throughout that process. And then you basically, after that, you're like, all right, this is great. We love it. We're going to go with this. And then you start moving into production and finding the talent to do the different things. So that's basically how we roll.
Okay. And in terms of agility, let's say someone on your team comes up with this.
Many times.
Many
times throughout the process, so we might change the direction 50 times, which is great, right? Because sometimes it's like, once you start working on and structuring that, an idea comes like, oh shit, can I swear? It's like, oh man, that's a great idea. We should look into that. And something else might come out from that. And that really is the agility that wouldn't work with the traditional agency model, because we're all working together. And when that idea comes, it's like, every time I get super excited when there's a new direction or an idea. It's like, okay, let's look into that and let's start looking at it if we can actually execute on that. So yeah, absolutely. That sort of creative environment is fundamental to make this work. And have that agility and option to go ahead on something that you saw, that might be super cool. So absolutely, this sort of framework really helps on that sort of coming up with new ideas and concepts on the go, and maybe even last minute we might have another direction that we will look into if we can actually execute on that. Sometimes I'm the party pooper, so I'm like, time is clicking, sorry, we don't have time to do that, like, great idea, let's save that for the next one. So sometimes I'm the party pooper.
Yeah, you can't do everything, but it sounds like you have a really there's a great creative freedom, and which I think is absolutely great. One thing that I'd love to ask about, just because it's been on my mind, I saw on Twitter this, I don't know if you've seen it, but in Las Vegas they have this new arena, the Globe. It's like a big giant ball. Have you seen it?
No.
And it's full with cameras both inside and outside, so you can place actual advertising. The entire arena can be turned into a display, and I think it costs something like $600,000 or something to run for a week, or maybe it was a day. But that just got me thinking, because you mentioned that in today's day and age, it's really hard to reach people. Even if you have a great product, you have a great message, everything is you got your ducks in a row. It's still so hard because people are busy and ultimately they don't really care. So the question
you have
is
3 seconds.
3 seconds, which is, it's not a lot of time. So how do you think about, or are you thinking about, what are some creative, interesting, different ways to reach people? Are you thinking along those terms, not just about what's the content, what's the narrative, but also what's the channel, what's the mechanism through which we get people? Are you thinking about anything like that, and are you seeing anything kind of interesting in terms of innovative, say?
Well, if we want to go into innovative and sort of where the world is heading is sort of generative AI and what AI is bringing, I think that's as a venue is quite an interesting aspect. But in terms of maximizing reach and doing let's say Super Bowl, obviously that's a great example of if you want to reach a lot of people, but then whether that then converts or whatnot, builds the brand, share of voice, maybe. But it's not easy. It's a noisy world, right? So you have to be clever in terms of where you invest your money so that it adds either, the brand recognition or brings you revenue or whatnot. Obviously these are important things, but it's not an easy game. I think the way that we approach it is obviously we look at the funnel, we look at the upper part. It's all about sort of the emotional attracting the person to be interested in the brand and start sort of driving that person into your venues and your site and so on. And then how do you go into that rational aspect and rationalizing the reason to purchase something, and then you sort of move into the loyalty aspects, and then you start looking at emotions again, how you recommend the product to another person, right? So we try to look at the channels from that point of view and the different tactics. From a sort of a reach point of view, I think we have invested over the years quite a lot, and we've been, I'm not saying super successful, but we are successful in terms of our blog, for example. We have an authority there. We have an authority to talk about certain topics and aspects, right? So we are investing a lot in our time and efforts into getting that organic traffic, and it's not just, on searching for the products, but searching for the brand and topics that people are interested in. Actually, a great example which we did during the COVID was that we got an idea, right? So it's like, okay, so people are now, being sick and COVID and whatnot, right? So we're like, okay, let's see. Like, people are probably thinking about how they can actually start training again after COVID. So we made an article on, like, post-COVID exercise tips, and we gave that sort of piece of information. And that's where, it gets interesting, is like when people are searching for that. And guess what? We rank pretty well. We have the authority on this topic like this. And so, I mean, these are sort of more the tactics that we're looking at. And so those are sort of a fascinating areas. But then again, I think what we sort of earlier talk about sort of influencers, and I'm not even talking about influencers, those who are like, here's the product, and then you're like, look at this from Polar. Yeah, great, that's fine. But then it's more about how do you get people to talk about the benefits. And I think that sort of a creator idea that, you have great filmmakers, you have great photographers, you have all these different types of talent, that somebody might be doing some stupid video. And I'm not actually saying stupid videos, but doing, behind the scenes, how to make beautiful product photography, for example. It just can be a social content creator. So how do you partner with people like that in order to create some interesting pieces of content? Because end of the day, it's all about entertainment, right? So, and as a brand, it's so hard to do that yourself. You have to look into other sort of talented people that are doing that as their business now. So how do you scale that? That's where I think it's kind of an interesting area of looking into how do you scale something like that. So it's not enough that you do just like, one hit wonder. It doesn't work like that. So how do you do that in a larger scale and get a lot of talented people to do things for you? That's where I'm fascinated and interested in sort of looking into.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities there, but it needs to be, you can do it, like you said, if you can do it quite in a crass, very crude way, let's just get the product out and let's look at the impressions it gets. And that's not necessarily how you build a brand, right?
No, absolutely not.
So we're pretty much, unfortunately, all out of time, but I'd be curious to learn for the people such as myself who don't have a Polar watch or product yet. Is there anything in your product portfolio that you recommend as like a...
Oh, little advertisement in the end. You know what? So I've been sort of using this, and which is always, with people like Polar, right? That's a common question, and then I answer that in a way that, it's so easy. Let's say easy to create a product that captures data. It's a sensor, right? So it captures your movement, it captures everything, it captures heart rate. But then once you get that data, it's like, how do you translate that into something meaningful? And that's super hard. So I think, we have invested as a company over the years so much into the sort of science and the research and understanding how the human body works, is that we actually has done more studies and research than any of the other companies all combined together. So that's where it gets interesting. If you're curious about translating that data into something meaningful for you, Polar might be a good choice for you. So I mean, we are very sort of very proud and very, very sort of fixated about the accuracy and the data, and translating that into something personalized and meaningful to individuals. I mean, we do have different product segments, of course, like for the sports, the ones who wants to train and improve their overall sort of performance, and then you get into a lower tier in a sense of just somebody who wants to be active. I think we offer a lot of great capabilities in terms of sort of the variety of the different segments and audiences. So, I mean, it really depends on who you are and what you want to do, right? So if you're an outdoor enthusiast, you want some capabilities according to that, or you're just, doing marathons, we have products for that. I mean, really depends on what you want to do. But Yeah, I think in generally speaking, it all comes down into translating that data into something meaningful is super fundamental. I've been probably saying fundamental too many times, but yeah, I think it's important that the data that you look at the numbers and the figures and charts, yeah, great, but making sure that that's accurate. I think that sort of differentiates us a little bit from the other competitors.
I think that's a really compelling pitch. Actually, I need to go and look at study the product portfolio a bit more closely. Anssi, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
For people who want to follow you, obviously we'll link to Polar and your website. But for people who want to follow you personally, and are you active on LinkedIn? Is that
LinkedIn? You can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram.
LinkedIn or Instagram. Okay, we'll put both of the links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. You can find all episodes of The Growth Pod on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.